In the vast expanses of the Russian Empire, amidst a landscape both beautiful and harsh, a young boy was born who would change the course of history. His name was Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov, later known as Lenin. Lenin was born Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov in Strelitskaya Ulitsa, Simbirsk, now Ulyanovsk, on April 22, 1870, and baptized 6 days later. As a child, he was known as Volodya, the common nickname variant of Vladimir. He was the third of 8 children, having 2 older siblings, Anna and Alexander. They were followed by 3 more children, Olga, Dmitry, and Maria. 2 later siblings died in infancy. His father, Ilya Nikolaevich Ulyanov, was a devout member of the Russian Orthodox Church and baptized his children into it, although his mother, Maria Alexandrovna Ulyanova, a Lutheran by upbringing, was largely indifferent to Christianity, a view that influenced her children. Ilya Ulyanov was from a family of former serfs. Ilya's father's ethnicity remains unclear, with suggestions that he was of Russian, Chuvash, Mordvin, or Kalmyk ancestry. Despite a lower-class background, he had risen to middle-class status, studying physics and mathematics at Kazan University before teaching at the Penza Institute for the Nobility. In mid-1863, Ilya married Maria, the well-educated daughter of a wealthy Swedish Lutheran mother, and a Russian Jewish father who had converted to Christianity and worked as a physician. According to historian Petrovsky Stern, it is likely that Lenin was unaware of his mother's half-Jewish ancestry, which was only discovered by Anna after his death. Soon after their wedding, Ilya obtained a job in Nizhny Novgorod, rising to become director of primary schools in the Simbirsk district 6 years later. 5 years after that, he was promoted to director of public schools for the province, overseeing the foundation of over 450 schools as a part of the government's plans for modernization. In January 1882, his dedication to education earned him the Order of Saint Vladimir, which bestowed on him the status of hereditary nobleman. Both of Lenin's parents were monarchists and liberal conservatives, being committed to the emancipation reform of 1861 introduced by the reformist Tsar Alexander II. They avoided political radicals, and there is no evidence that the police ever put them under surveillance for subversive thought. Every summer they holidayed at a rural manor in Kokoshkino. Among his siblings, Lenin was closest to his sister Olga, whom he often bossed around. He had an extremely competitive nature and could be destructive, but usually admitted his misbehavior. A keen sportsman, he spent much of his free time outdoors or playing chess, and excelled at school, the disciplinarian and conservative Simbirsk Classical Gymnasium. In January 1886, when Lenin was 15, his father died of a brain hemorrhage. 16. Subsequently, his behavior became erratic and confrontational, and he renounced his belief in God. At the time, Lenin's elder brother Alexander, whom he affectionately knew as Sasha, was studying at St. Petersburg University. Involved in political agitation against the absolute monarchy of the reactionary Tsar Alexander III, Alexander studied the writings of banned leftists and organized anti-government protests. He joined a revolutionary cell bent on assassinating the Tsar and was selected to construct a bomb. Before the attack could take place, the conspirators were arrested and tried, and Alexander was executed by hanging in May 1887. Despite the emotional trauma of his father's and brother's deaths, Lenin continued studying, graduated from school at the top of his class with a gold medal for exceptional performance, and decided to study law at Kazan University. Upon entering Kazan University in August 1887, Lenin moved into a nearby flat. There, he joined a Zemlyakestvo, a form of university society that represented the men of a particular region. This group elected him as its representative to the university's Zemlyakestvo Council, and he took part in a December demonstration against government restrictions that banned student societies. The police arrested Lenin and accused him of being a ringleader in the demonstration. He was expelled from the university, and the Ministry of Internal Affairs exiled him to his family's Kokoshkino estate. There, he read voraciously, becoming enamored with Nikolai Chernyshevsky's 1863 pro-revolutionary novel What Is to Be Done. Vladimir was an exceptional student, excelling in his studies and developing a keen interest in the revolutionary ideas that were spreading across Europe. The writings of Karl Marx and the tales of previous uprisings fascinated him, planting the seeds of revolutionary thought. Lenin's mother was concerned by her son's radicalization, and was instrumental in convincing the Interior Ministry to allow him to return to the city of Kazan, but not the university. On his return, he joined Nikolai Fedosev's Revolutionary Circle, through which he discovered Karl Marx's 1867 book Capital. This sparked his interest in Marxism, a socio-political theory that argued that society developed in stages, that this development resulted from class struggle, and that capitalist society would ultimately give way to socialist society and then communist society. Wary of his political views, Lenin's mother bought a country estate in Alekivka village, Samara Oblast, in the hope that her son would turn his attention to agriculture. He had little interest in farm management, and his mother soon sold the land, keeping the house as a summer home. A pivotal moment in Vladimir's life was the execution of his older brother, Alexander, in 1887. Alexander had been involved in a plot to assassinate Tsar Alexander III, and his death deeply impacted young Vladimir, cementing his resolve to fight against the autocratic regime. In September 1889, the Ulyanov family moved to the city of Samara, where Lenin joined Alexei Sklyarenko's Socialist Discussion Circle. There, Lenin fully embraced Marxism and produced a Russian-language translation of Marx and Friedrich Engels's 1848 political pamphlet, the Communist Manifesto. He began to read the works of the Russian Marxist Georgy Plekhanov, agreeing with Plekhanov's argument that Russia was moving from feudalism to capitalism and so socialism would be implemented by the proletariat, or urban working class, rather than the peasantry. This Marxist perspective contrasted with the view of the agrarian socialist Narodnik movement, which held that the peasantry could establish socialism in Russia by forming peasant communes, thereby bypassing capitalism. This Narodnik view developed in the 1860s with the People's Freedom Party and was then dominant within the Russian revolutionary movement. Lenin rejected the premise of the agrarian socialist argument but was influenced by agrarian socialists like Pyotr Tkachev and Sergei Nechayev and befriended several Narodniks. In May 1890, Maria, who retained societal influence as the widow of a nobleman, persuaded the authorities to allow Lenin to take his exams externally at the University of St. Petersburg, where he obtained the equivalent of a first-class degree with honors. The graduation celebrations were marred when his sister Olga died of typhoid. Lenin remained in Samara for several years, working first as a legal assistant for a regional court and then for a local lawyer. He devoted much time to radical politics, remaining active in Sklyarenko's group and formulating ideas about how Marxism applied to Russia. Inspired by Plekhanov's work, Lenin collected data on Russian society, using it to support a Marxist interpretation of societal development and counter the claims of the Narodniks. He wrote a paper on peasant economics. It was rejected by the liberal journal Russian Thought. As Vladimir grew older, he moved to St. Petersburg, the heart of the Russian Empire. There, he witnessed the severe poverty and suffering of the working class, further fueling his revolutionary spirit. There, he worked as a barrister's assistant and rose to a senior position in a Marxist revolutionary cell that called itself the Social Democrats after the Marxist Social Democratic Party of Germany. Championing Marxism within the socialist movement, he encouraged the founding of revolutionary cells in Russia's industrial centers. By late 1894, he was leading a Marxist workers' circle, and meticulously covered his tracks to evade police spies. He began a romantic relationship with Nadezhda Nadia Krupskaya, a Marxist schoolteacher. He also authored a political tract criticizing the Narodnik agrarian socialists, what the Friends of the People are and how they fight the Social Democrats. Around 200 copies were illegally printed in 1894. Hoping to cement connections between his Social Democrats and emancipation of labor, a group of Russian Marxists based in Switzerland, Lenin visited the country to meet group members Plekhanov and Pavel Axelrod. He proceeded to Paris to meet Marx's son-in-law Paul Lafargue and to research the Paris Commune of 1871, which he considered an early prototype for a proletarian government. Financed by his mother, he stayed in a Swiss health spa before traveling to Berlin, where he studied for 6 weeks at the Staatsbibliothek and met the Marxist Wilhelm Liebknecht. Returning to Russia with a stash of illegal revolutionary publications, he traveled to various cities distributing literature to striking workers. While involved in producing a news sheet, Rabushi Delo, Workers' Cause, he was among 40 activists arrested in St. Petersburg and charged with sedition. Lenin's involvement with revolutionary circles deepened. He believed that a small, dedicated group of professional revolutionaries could lead the working class to victory, a concept that would later become central to his strategy. After his exile, Lenin settled in Pskov in early 1900. There, he began raising funds for a newspaper, Iskra, Spark, a new organ of the Russian Marxist Party, now calling itself the Russian Social Democratic Labor Party, RSDLP. In July 1900, Lenin left Russia for Western Europe. In Switzerland he met other Russian Marxists, and at a Corsair conference they agreed to launch the paper from Munich, where Lenin relocated in September. Containing contributions from prominent European Marxists, Iskra was smuggled into Russia, becoming the country's most successful underground publication for 50 years. He first adopted the pseudonym Lenin in December 1901, possibly based on the Siberian river Lena Winkworth around 60, he often used the fuller pseudonym of N. Lenin, and while the N did not stand for anything, a popular misconception later arose that it represented Nikolai. Under this pseudonym, in 1902 he published his most influential publication to date, the pamphlet What Is to Be Done, which outlined his thoughts on the need for a vanguard party to lead the proletariat to revolution. The year 1905 saw the first major tremors of revolution in Russia. Discontent with the autocratic Tsar Nicholas II, widespread poverty, and the failure of the Russo-Japanese War led to a nationwide uprising. Though this revolution was ultimately suppressed, it set the stage for future upheaval. In response to the revolution of 1905, which had failed to overthrow the government, Tsar Nicholas II accepted a series of liberal reforms in his October Manifesto. In this climate, Lenin felt it safe to return to St. Petersburg. Joining the editorial board of Novaya Zhizn, New Life, a radical legal newspaper run by Maria Andreeva, he used it to discuss issues facing the RSDLP. He encouraged the party to seek out a much wider membership, and advocated the continual escalation of violent confrontation, believing both to be necessary for a successful revolution. Recognizing that membership fees and donations from a few wealthy sympathizers were insufficient to finance the Bolsheviks' activities, Lenin endorsed the idea of robbing post offices, railway stations, trains, and banks. Under the lead of Leonid Krasin, a group of Bolsheviks began carrying out such criminal actions, the best known taking place in June 1907, when a group of Bolsheviks acting under the leadership of Joseph Stalin committed an armed robbery of the State Bank in Tiflis, Georgia. In May 1908, Lenin lived briefly in London, where he used the British Museum reading room to write Materialism and Imperial Criticism, an attack on what he described as the bourgeois reactionary falsehood of Bogdanov's relativism. Lenin's factionalism began to alienate increasing numbers of Bolsheviks, including his former close supporters Alexei Rykov and Lev Kamenev. The Okhrana exploited his factionalist attitude by sending a spy, Roman Malinovsky, to act as a vocal Lenin supporter within the party. Various Bolsheviks expressed their suspicions about Malinovsky to Lenin, although it is unclear if the latter was aware of the spy's duplicity. It is possible that he used Malinovsky to feed false information to the Okhrana. Moving to Krakow in the Kingdom of Galicia and Lodomeria, a culturally Polish part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, he used Jagiellonian University's library to conduct research. He stayed in close contact with the RSDLP, which was operating in the Russian Empire, convincing the Duma's Bolshevik members to split from their parliamentary alliance with the Mensheviks. In January 1913, Stalin, whom Lenin referred to as the "wonderful Georgian," visited him, and they discussed the future of non-Russian ethnic groups in the empire. Due to the ailing health of both Lenin and his wife, they moved to the rural town of Bialy Dunajec, before heading to Bern for Nadia to have surgery on her goiter. Lenin was in Galicia when the First World War broke out. The war pitted the Russian Empire against the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and due to his Russian citizenship, Lenin was arrested and briefly imprisoned until his anti-Tsarist credentials were explained. Lenin and his wife returned to Bern, before relocating to Zurich in February 1916. Lenin was angry that the German Social Democratic Party was supporting the German war effort, which was a direct contravention of the Second International Stuttgart Resolution that socialist parties would oppose the conflict and saw the Second International as defunct. He attended the Zimmerwald Conference in September 1915 and the Kienthal Conference in April 1916, urging socialists across the continent to convert the imperialist war into a continent-wide civil war, with the proletariat pitted against the bourgeoisie and aristocracy. In July 1916, Lenin's mother died, but he was unable to attend her funeral. Her death deeply affected him, and he became depressed, fearing that he too would die before seeing the proletarian revolution. In February 1917, the Russian Empire was on the brink of collapse. The Great War had drained the nation's resources, leaving the people starving and desperate. Discontent boiled over, and the streets of Petrograd became a battleground. The State Duma took over control of the country, establishing the Russian Provisional Government and converting the empire into a new Russian Republic. When Lenin learned of this from his base in Switzerland, he celebrated with other dissidents. He decided to return to Russia to take charge of the Bolsheviks, but found that most passages into the country were blocked due to the ongoing conflict. He organized a plan with other dissidents to negotiate a passage for them through Germany, with which Russia was then at war. Recognizing that these dissidents could cause problems for their Russian enemies, the German government agreed to permit 32 Russian citizens to travel by train through their territory, among them Lenin and his wife. For political reasons, Lenin and the Germans agreed to a cover story that Lenin had traveled by sealed train carriage through German territory, but in fact the train was not truly sealed, and the passengers were allowed to disembark to, for example, spend the night in Frankfurt. The group traveled by train from Zurich to Sassnitz, proceeding by ferry to Trelleborg, Sweden, and from there to the Haparanda-Tornio border crossing and then to Helsinki before taking the final train to Petrograd in disguise. The February Revolution forced Tsar Nicholas II to abdicate, ending over 3 centuries of Romanov rule. In his place, a provisional government was established, promising democratic reforms. However, this government struggled to address the nation's crises. Lenin called for all power to the Soviets, the councils of workers and soldiers. He argued that the provisional government was incapable of delivering peace, land, and bread, the key demands of the people. On the night of October 25, 1917, the Bolsheviks launched their coup. Red Guards, led by Lenin and Trotsky, stormed the Winter Palace, the seat of the provisional government. By the following morning, the Bolsheviks had seized control. The next day, Lenin stood before the Congress of Soviets, declaring the formation of a new government. The world's first socialist state was born, promising a radical new era of equality in workers' control. The Bolshevik Revolution was celebrated by many as the dawn of a new age. However, it also plunged the country into a brutal civil war, as anti-Bolshevik forces, known as the White Army, rose up to challenge the new regime. The Russian Civil War that followed was one of the bloodiest conflicts in history. It pitted the Red Army, led by Trotsky, against a fractured but formidable White Army, alongside foreign intervention forces. Lenin's leadership during the Civil War was marked by ruthless determination. He implemented the policy of war communism, which included the nationalization of industry and the requisition of grain from peasants, measures that were both effective and harsh. The birth of the Soviet state was not without immense struggle. The years following the October Revolution were marked by civil war. The Bolsheviks, now known as the Red Army, faced fierce resistance from the White Army, a coalition of monarchists, conservatives, and foreign powers seeking to quash the revolution. The Civil War brought untold suffering to the Russian people. Villages were destroyed, millions perished, and famine swept across the land. Despite this, the Bolsheviks emerged victorious, solidifying their control over the vast territory of Russia. The Civil War brought untold suffering to the Russian people. Villages were destroyed, millions perished, and famine swept across the land. Despite this, the Bolsheviks emerged victorious, solidifying their control over the vast territory of Russia. Lenin, the architect of the revolution, now faced the monumental task of rebuilding a nation ravaged by war. He introduced the new economic policy, or NEP, a temporary retreat from full socialism that allowed for a limited market economy and private ownership, aiming to revive the shattered economy. Despite his revolutionary politics, Lenin disliked revolutionary experimentation in literature and the arts, expressing his dislike of expressionism, futurism, and cubism, and conversely favoring realism and Russian classic literature. Lenin also had a conservative attitude towards sex and marriage. Throughout his adult life, he was in a relationship with Krupskaya, a fellow Marxist whom he married. Lenin and Krupskaya both regretted that they never had children, and they enjoyed entertaining their friends' offspring. Reed noted that Lenin had very close, warm, lifelong relationships with his close family members. He had no lifelong friends, and Armand has been cited as being his only close, intimate confidant. Aside from Russian, Lenin spoke and read French, German, and English. Concerned with physical fitness, he exercised regularly, enjoyed cycling, swimming, and hunting, and also developed a passion for mountain walking in the Swiss peaks. He was also fond of pets, in particular cats. Tending to eschew luxury, he lived a Spartan lifestyle, and Pipes noted that Lenin was exceedingly modest in his personal wants, leading an austere, almost ascetic, style of life. Lenin despised untidiness, always keeping his work desk tidy and his pencils sharpened, and insisted on total silence while he was working. According to Fisher, Lenin's vanity was minimal, and for this reason he disliked the cult of personality that the Soviet administration began to build around him. He nevertheless accepted that it might have some benefits in unifying the communist movement. In March 1923, Lenin had a third stroke and lost his ability to speak. That month, he experienced partial paralysis on his right side and began exhibiting sensory aphasia. By May, he appeared to be making a slow recovery, regaining some of his mobility, speech, and writing skills. In October, he made a final visit to the Kremlin. In his final weeks, Lenin was visited by Zinoviev, Kamenev, and Bukharin. The latter visited him at his Gorky mansion on the day of his death. On January 21, 1924, Lenin fell into a coma and died later that day at age 53. His official cause of death was recorded as an incurable disease of the blood vessels. The Soviet government publicly announced Lenin's death the following day on January 23. Mourners from the Communist Party, trade unions, and Soviets visited his Gorky home to inspect the body, which was carried aloft in a red coffin by leading Bolsheviks. Transported by train to Moscow, the coffin was taken to the House of Trade Unions, where the body lay in state. Over the next 3 days, around 1 million mourners came to see the body, many queuing for hours in the freezing conditions. On January 26, the 11th All-Union Congress of Soviets met to pay respects, with speeches by Kalinin, Zinoviev, and Stalin. Notably, Trotsky was absent. He had been convalescing in the Caucasus, and he later claimed that Stalin sent him a telegram with the incorrect date of the planned funeral, making it impossible for him to arrive in time. Lenin's funeral took place the following day, when his body was carried to Red Square, accompanied by martial music, where assembled crowds listened to a series of speeches before the corpse was placed into the vault of a specially erected mausoleum. Despite the freezing temperatures, tens of thousands attended. Against Krupskia's protestations, Lenin's body was embalmed to preserve it for long-term public display in the Red Square Mausoleum. During this process, Lenin's brain was removed. In 1925 an institute was established to dissect it, revealing that Lenin had had severe sclerosis. In July 1929, the Politburo agreed to replace the temporary mausoleum with a permanent one in granite, which was finished in 1933. His sarcophagus was replaced in 1940 and again in 1970. For safety amid the Second World War, from 1941 to 1945 the body was temporarily moved to Tyumen. As of 2023, his body remains on public display in Lenin's mausoleum on Red Square. Lenin's legacy is complex and multifaceted. For some, he remains a symbol of revolutionary change and the fight against oppression. For others, he is a figure associated with the brutality and repression that followed the revolution. Today, Lenin's influence can still be felt in Russia and around the world. His ideas continue to inspire debate and reflection, reminding us of the power of revolutionary thought and the profound impact one individual can have on history.